The apartment had a strange stillness that morning, one that made the sunlight slicing through the blinds seem unnaturally sharp, almost painful. Sarah's eyes snapped open, staring at the ceiling as though the familiar cracks were suddenly unfamiliar, their shapes twisting in the dim morning light. The air smelled faintly metallic, a subtle tang of iron that made her stomach churn. It had been 3 days since the whispers first began, each one leaving her a little more hollow, a little more certain that something in this apartment wasn't bound by human understanding. Her heart thudded erratically, loud enough that she feared it would betray her to the shadows lurking in corners she couldn't see. She rose carefully, placing her bare feet on the cold wooden floor, and paused. The silence was different today, heavier, suffocating, as if the air itself weighed down her shoulders. The usual morning sounds, distant traffic, birds, the hum of refrigerators, were muted or perhaps swallowed entirely. Something pressed against the windows, bending light in ways that made the room feel crooked. Sarah stepped forward, her hand brushing against the hallway wall. The paint was cold, almost damp, and she could feel faint vibrations beneath her fingertips. Subconsciously, she traced the wall toward the source of the earliest whispers, the locked door at the end of the corridor. She hadn't dared approach it since the last encounter, but the pull was magnetic, irresistible, like gravity itself had conspired with the apartment to lure her closer. The door loomed ahead, its dark mahogany surface blotched with faint scratches that hadn't been there the night before. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the knob, noticing how cold it felt, far colder than the air surrounding it. The wood pulsed faintly under her touch, an almost imperceptible vibration that sent chills up her spine. The whispering began again, low at first, barely audible, curling around the edges of her consciousness. "Sarah," it breathed, soft, coaxing, almost intimate. She froze, unable to pull away, the whisper threading through her mind like silk coated in ice. It was familiar and alien at once, a voice she felt she should recognize but could not. The door creaked slightly as if responding to her hesitation, the ancient hinges flexing with a deliberate slowness, warning her, teasing her. With a trembling hand, she twisted the knob. It moved easily, more than it should have, as though the door itself wanted to open. A cold draft slipped through the crack, carrying the faint scent of earth and decay, the unmistakable tang of something dead long before she was born. The apartment seemed to inhale with her movement, pulling shadows toward the hallway, stretching them into grotesque forms. For a brief moment, she thought she glimpsed figures standing just beyond the door, tall, thin, their heads tilted unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible ways. Then, as her eyes adjusted, the shapes melted back into darkness, leaving nothing but the ominous stillness and the subtle heartbeat of the apartment itself. The door was slightly ajar, and inside the room waited, holding its secrets like a predator waiting for prey. Stepping into the threshold, Sarah felt the temperature drop sharply. Her breath fogged before her, curling upward in pale spirals that vanished into the oppressive gloom. The floor beneath her feet was cold, uneven, as though the room had shifted slightly overnight. Her eyes struggled to adjust. The darkness was thicker here, absorbing the weak morning light. She heard it then, a soft, irregular scratching coming from the far corner of the room, slow and deliberate, like fingernails tracing the grain of the wood. Each tap echoed faintly, bouncing off the walls in a pattern that was disorienting, unnatural. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to locate the source, her heartbeat hammering in sync with the scratches. The room seemed to hum around her, resonating with her fear. A sudden breeze swept through the room, although no windows were open. Papers on a small desk fluttered, lifting as if nudged by invisible hands. On the floor, a faint outline of a handprint appeared in dust that hadn't been disturbed in weeks. The print pulsed slightly, as though it were alive, an invitation or a warning. She couldn't tell which one. Whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping into a chorus of voices that both called her name and warned her away. "Don't come closer." "Come closer," they said, simultaneously soft and urgent. She stepped back instinctively, bumping into a chair, which tipped over on its own before hitting the floor. The sudden noise echoed unnaturally, then stopped, leaving only a pregnant silence that pressed into her eardrums. The apartment held its breath, waiting for her next move. Sarah's mind raced. She knew logically she should flee, should leave the room and the apartment, abandon the nightmare entirely. But an invisible thread seemed to tether her to the door, to the darkness beyond, to the whispers that promised answers she didn't want yet, but could not resist. Her hands shook as she brushed a strand of hair from her face, and for a moment she thought she felt a presence behind her, close enough to inhale her fear. Turning slowly, she saw nothing, yet the room felt denser, as if something unseen had shifted to occupy the space she had just vacated. The shadows were thicker now, their edges soft but writhing, as if animated by a consciousness beyond comprehension. The whispering escalated, voices overlapping into unintelligible murmurs, layered like a dense fog. She could swear one voice was hers, repeating a warning she had screamed aloud in her dreams, yet she had never uttered. The floorboards beneath her feet vibrated slightly, then shifted with a slow, deliberate creaking. Something moved in the far corner, a shadow taller than any human, bending, stretching, folding in ways that defied logic. She felt it watch her, a living gaze through darkness, calculating, patient, inevitable. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She could no longer tell if she was standing in a room or if the room had become a living entity, watching, waiting, learning.